What would you do if you're driving down an unfamiliar road and all of a sudden you notice that the clock on your dashboard and phone have stopped changing and now there seems to be someone chasing you down this never-ending road? Well, that's what happened to the person who submitted today's spooky story. So let's just get right into it. This all started when I missed my exit while driving home. If I had known it would lead me somewhere that technically does not exist, I would have just turned around and taken the extra 20 minutes back home. This happened last October. I was driving back from a work conference in North Georgia, somewhere between Jasper and Ellijay. My phone battery was at 12% and my GPS rerouted me after I missed an exit while trying to respond to a text from my sister. Technically, I also missed the road my GPS was trying to reroute me to. My mistake took me onto a smaller 2-lane road that I had never seen before. No big deal. I figured it was just a back way around traffic. The weird part started about 10 minutes in when I realized there were no road signs, not even a speed limit or a road name. I checked my GPS. The map was still moving, but the road beneath my car was gray. Usually, the travel line is blue. I assumed it was a glitch. My signal out there was terrible anyway. But then I noticed that my clock had stopped. It was 4:17 p.m. when I glanced down. I remember that clearly because I had been trying to calculate whether I could make it home before dark. About 5 minutes later, I checked again. Still 4:17. I waited a few more minutes and I tapped my phone screen again. It lit up, but the time was the same. My radio display also read 4:17. I felt this tight pressure in my chest, like when you drop too quickly on a roller coaster. About another mile down the road, I saw a gas station. It looked older, like something from the 1970s. The logo on the sign was faded and sun-bleached, and the digital price board was blank. There were 2 pumps, both dirty, and only one car was parked out front, an older silver sedan. I almost kept driving, but something compelled me to pull into the gas station. For some reason, the air felt different when I stepped out of my car. The only time I'd felt something similar was when I had gone skiing and needed to adjust to the higher altitude. There was also this faint metallic smell, like wet pennies. When I walked inside, I noticed a bell above the door, but it did not ring when I opened it. There was a man behind the counter. I'm guessing he was in his late 50s from his appearance. He was just standing there with his hands flat on the counter. He did not greet me, but I said hello anyway and asked if they had a charger I could buy because my phone was about to die. He just stared at me with this blank expression. I noticed then that he had not blinked once. After a few seconds, he said, "You're not supposed to be here." I laughed a little bit because I genuinely thought he was joking. I asked what he meant. He stared for a couple more seconds before he said, "This road is not open." I asked if there was another way back to the highway because my GPS brought me here and it seemed to have messed up. He slowly looked down at the phone in my hand and said, "That won't help you here." At that exact moment, I looked down at my screen and saw that it had gone black. My phone was completely dead. It had been at 12% just a few minutes prior. At this point, I was very uncomfortable and just wanted to get the hell out of there. So I thanked him anyway and told him that I would just head back the way I came. He said, "You can try." I walked out of the store without buying anything. I noticed the silver sedan that was parked outside was gone. I got back into my car and turned the key. The clock still read 4:17. I drove back the way I came for what felt like over an hour, which was much longer than the time it took for me to get there. I started crying out of pure frustration at that point. I felt like I was driving in a tunnel of never-ending trees. Then, suddenly, I saw headlights behind me. Relief hit me instantly. I thought this meant I must be close to a normal road. A black SUV was coming up fast. I pulled slightly to the side to let it pass, but it stayed directly behind me, seeming to match my speed exactly. I could see the driver through my rearview mirror. He was sitting completely still with his head tilted downward and staring hard, like he was concentrating. He also had the headlights on, which was odd because it was still daylight. I sped up, so did he. I slowed down, so did he. He never attempted to pass. This went on for a long stretch before I heard static coming through the car radio, and the time flipped from 4:17 to 5:02 in one instant. I looked behind me and saw that the SUV was gone. Ahead of me, I could see a normal highway exit sign. I drove straight onto the highway without looking back. When I got home, I searched for that road. It does not exist on Google Maps or Apple Maps. I even pulled up county GIS records and old state highway archives. Nothing. Here's the part that makes me question my sanity. 2 weeks later, I received a handwritten envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single, slightly blurry photograph. It was my car parked at that gas station. The picture was taken from behind my vehicle with the license plate in clear view. The problem is, this was my old license plate that I had changed almost 15 years ago. The timestamp in the corner read 417. I considered that this might be some sort of prank, but I've only told this story to my sister, and she completely brushed it off like it was no big deal. She's also not the type of person who would do something like that. So, am I crazy? Or did I somehow end up on a road that no one was supposed to be on? Let me know what you think about this story in the comments, and don't forget to follow for the next spooky story.
So this girl wants to share a story about something that happened to her beloved uncle that is no longer living. This story is very much real, and it is a story that now is being passed down from generation to generation in her family. This happened in Mexico in the 80s in La Colonia La Cascada. So back in the 80s, her uncle Jose used to work at a newspaper place, and he did the night shift. So he really didn't have time to go party or hang out with his friends, being that his work was really demanding. So finally he gets a day off, and he ends up going to look for his friends where he knew that they would go and hang out all night. He really needed a distraction, so when he went to the spot where they usually hang out, he did find them there. He was actually really excited because not only did he find his friends there, but he also found his uncle Chucho there. And his uncle Chucho was the brother of his dad. His friends and uncle received him with open arms, so obviously he was really excited to see all of them, and also excited to see his uncle because he hadn't seen him in such a long time. So they started drinking, they started talking, and it got really late to the point where the streets were basically abandoned, and little by little each friend ended up going home until it was just him and his tío Chucho there. So the girl telling the story says that her uncle Jose ended up trying to get tío Chucho up because at this point he was really drunk to the point where he had fallen asleep on the ground. So he obviously wanted to make sure that Uncle Chucho got home safe, so he ends up picking him up and grabbing him from the shoulder like you would somebody that was drunk and you were gonna walk them somewhere. I realize that I keep going from saying Uncle Chucho, tío Chucho, uncle and tío, same thing. Tío, Spanish for uncle. Uncle, English for tío. So he ends up taking him, they're walking, and they get to a point where the street was downhill. And tío Jose explains how tío Chucho ended up getting heavier and heavier to the point where he just couldn't hold him up anymore. Felt like he had a sack of rocks on his shoulder and he couldn't anymore, and that's when he basically just let him go and he hit the ground. So as tío Chucho's on the ground, tío Jose basically tells him, I'm gonna leave you here because I cannot carry you anymore, and plus you're falling asleep. In that very moment, tío Chucho, who was basically on the ground, started laughing. And tío Jose says that it was a laugh that he didn't recognize coming from tío Chucho ever in his life. The voice was very deep and very raspy, and a voice that definitely was not tío Chucho's voice. Then tío Chucho, laying on the ground face down, says something. He says, "You're coming with me." After that, apparently he picks his head up from the ground, looks at tío Jose, and the face was not recognizable. That was not tío Chucho's face that was looking back at him. He describes the face as very deformed. There was blood, but the blood almost looked dry all over his face, like he had been ran over. It was just crazy. It was definitely not his uncle's face. Before tío Jose could even react, he explains how tío Chucho from the ground grabbed him by the shoulder and dropped him to the ground like if he was a rag doll. The force that tío Chucho had to drag him down was crazy. He said that there's no way this man could have been that strong, and he was trying to fight him off at this point, but he was being dragged all around the ground, like his clothes was tearing apart. He could feel his skin coming apart from how tío Chucho was hurting him. Somehow he got free from tío Chucho's grasp, and he said that even when he stood up, there was blood leaking out of his arm, and he started running home as fast as he could. And as he was running, tío Chucho, or whatever the fuck tío Chucho was now, was chasing after him. There were points when he was running that he could feel tío Chucho's like almost grab his back, and he was just going as hard and as fast as he could. He eventually made it home. He ran at the door, and by this point he was so scared that he couldn't find the right key. He started banging and screaming for everybody to wake up, and eventually his mom did open the door. When his mom, the girl's grandmother who's telling the story, sees him, she sees that he is pale, that he's bloody, that something happened, and he immediately walks into the house and he's screaming at his mom, him, close the door right now, just close it. At this point, he is crying, like crying so hard and screaming, close the door, we need to pray, and he is on his knees inside that house now. The grandmother closed the door without even asking him anything. She started praying. While his mom was praying at the door, they can still hear him crying and saying, the devil's coming for me, the devil's coming for me. Somehow his mom, the girl's grandma, was able to calm him down, and by that point all of his siblings, like all of them, had came out, seeing what was happening. Like, he was screaming, he was crying. They will never forget this moment either. Like, the girl said that her mom was one of the youngest siblings when this happened, and she still remembers this night clearly. Mind you, her mom was 7 years old when this happened. Like, she still remembers this. The mom, when she's 7, she remembers that day because she said she was awoken by somebody screaming and crying, and when she walked into the living room, that her older brother was on his knees crying, screaming at them to pray, and that the devil was after him. So after this day, obviously Tío Jose never hung out with his friends if Tío Chucho was around. He was still around. Tío Jose also never understood what happened that night. He doesn't know at what point something happened to his Tío Chucho, or if this was just his Tío Chucho now and he just didn't know because he hadn't hung out with him, or he doesn't know how long he had been not seeing his Tío, to the point where maybe something showed up and is pretending to be his uncle, and he had no idea because he had been so busy, hadn't seen a lot of people, so he didn't know. He also doesn't know if he had been hanging out with his Tío Chucho that night or not. For all he knows, Tío Chucho was at home and he had been hanging out with somebody that was not him. In reality, it doesn't matter because he never asked questions. He never wanted the answers. He just knew that he didn't want to be near Tío Chucho from that time forward. I would be asking questions, not just that, I would be telling on him to my dad because your brother attacked me. Like, what the fuck? Also, the fact that this man had been working so hard, never had a day off, and when he did this happens, what the hell? What do you guys think happened? Honestly, I imagine these stories in my head, and this, yeah, I would watch this scary movie and it would actually fucking scare me because what the fuck? This would never make me drink again. This would never make me hang out with my friends again. Like, what the hell?
What would you do if you heard something scratching from underneath the floor of your house? This story was submitted by a viewer who experienced exactly that when they were 8 years old. When I was 8, I lived in the Philippines with my grandparents. My parents were always busy with work, so I stayed with them most of the time. Their house was old and a little run down, but I'd gotten used to it. There was only one place in the house that always made me uncomfortable, a small storage room at the end of the hallway. The room itself was tiny and packed with old junk my grandparents had collected over the years. Boxes, broken furniture, things they never used anymore. They told me they hadn't really moved anything in that room since they first moved into the house. But something about it always felt wrong. Whenever I walked past the door, I felt this heavy, uneasy feeling. Sometimes, if the house was quiet enough, I could hear faint scratching sounds coming from inside the room. I told my grandparents about it a few times, but they always brushed it off. Behind the house there were woods, so they assumed it was probably some kind of animal. But the sound never really felt like it was coming from the walls. It always sounded like it was coming from the floor. One night, while my grandparents were asleep, I woke up and needed to use the bathroom. The hallway lights were off, and the only light came from the moon shining through the windows. I stepped out of my room and slowly walked down the hallway. To get to the bathroom, I had to pass the storage room. As I got closer to the door, I suddenly felt that same heavy feeling again, like something was slowing me down. And then I heard it, the scratching sound. But this time it was much louder. The whole house was silent, so I could hear it clearly now. It sounded frantic, like something was desperately trying to escape. And it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from underneath the floor of the storage room. The scratching got louder and louder, and I froze in the hallway. My heart felt like it dropped straight into my stomach. Whatever was under that floor sounded like it was trying to dig its way out. I finally snapped out of it and ran to my grandparents' room. I woke them up crying and told them what I heard. After that night, I refused to walk past that part of the hallway alone. If I needed to use the bathroom at night, my grandma had to walk with me. Eventually, a few years passed and I moved in with my parents. I tried to forget about it, and for a while I did, until one day I heard that my grandparents were moving out of the house. When they started clearing out the storage room, they discovered something strange underneath all the junk that had been piled up in there for years. There was a small hatch in the floor. My grandparents never opened it, they just left it alone. But when I heard that, I immediately thought back to the scratching I heard that night. And even now, I still wonder what could have been underneath that hatch trying to get out. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I understand why the grandparents didn't want to open the hatch, but I'm so curious to know what was underneath it. I wonder if there would be like evidence of someone living down there and actually scratching at the ceiling. If you have any stories you'd like me to read, please email them to me and I will get to them if I can, and I will see you in the next one.
My grandma's house was haunted in the Appalachian Mountains, and it doesn't get much worse than that. So I've told this story before, and I'm going to tell it again because I left some things out last time. She wasn't doing good. I moved in with her to take care of her right out of high school. She had fell and broke her back, so she was bedridden. She could not get up. I had been there alone most of the time, cleaning the house up, getting ready for her to come home from the nursing home. My bedroom was downstairs, her bedroom was upstairs, but it's not like a conventional two-story house like you're thinking. You enter the house on the second floor. There's a bridge, and you go on the second floor, and the basement isn't really a basement. So, her bed is directly above my bed. My bedroom is down here, her bedroom is up here, and I have a baby monitor in there so that way I can hear if she needs something. Sometimes she'd holler for a Coke or a hot dog. And this one night, in the Appalachian Mountains, a lot of crazy things happen, but the house I grew up in didn't have stuff like this happen. We weren't in the woods. My grandmother's house was in the woods. This one night, she had only been home from the nursing home maybe a week, probably not even a week. And it was late at night, of course. Everything happens in the dark in the Appalachian Mountains. And I heard the front door close. I didn't hear it open, but it was a very distinct sound, so I heard it close. And I was like, what the heck? Nobody's supposed to be here. It's late at night and the door was locked. So then I hear footsteps moving down the hallway towards my grandmother's room. Heavy footsteps, like a big guy in boots. Stomp, 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 all the way down the hallway, and it stops right beside my grandma's bed, which is directly above me. I'm in the basement. I'm staring up like absolutely terrified, obviously, because I have nothing to protect myself with and I'm a teenager. My grandmother said, "I've been waiting for you." Excuse me? I have never been so scared in my life. She said that, and I was frozen, like primal fear frozen. I could not do anything. So after 15 or 20 seconds, after I've gathered myself, I go upstairs to check on my grandma. I go up the stairway, front door's right there. Front door's closed, still locked. Nobody was in this house with us. I walk down the hallway, I'm looking just to be sure. And I walk into my grandma's room and I said, "Nana, who were you talking to?" And she said, "What are you talking about?" Okay, so in the Appalachian Mountains, there's this thing called sundowners. When the sun goes down, you kind of lose your mind a little bit if you are of that age. She was in her mid-70s, late 70s at this time. She had no idea what I was talking about. Never talked about it again, but that was the first strange thing that happened in that house. It just got worse from there. But that was the first thing. And it terrified me. After that night, I slept with a nightlight on. A lamp in the corner of the room every night, and I still do it to this day at 30 years old.
Because I love to visit haunted and spooky places, this story freaked me out. I was on a subreddit, and I will put everything in the description below, but pretty much the writer says that about a year ago, the writer, the sister, and a couple of friends were visiting this haunted hotel. And the only reason why they wanted to go visit is because recently this abandoned hotel was on the news. And the writer says that they actually visited this place many times because it was newly abandoned. There were still some TVs hanging on the walls, there was still beds that were made, so it was kind of clean. Now they love to ghost hunt, and one of the friends ended up taking a lot of ghost hunting equipment. Voice boxes, EMF readers, you name it. So as they're roaming this entire hotel, a specific room kind of catches their attention. They are there, they're sitting down, they're setting up all the equipment, and they start talking. They start asking questions, and the usual static is picked up. Nothing crazy, nothing insane. The casual few words every now and then. They're getting ready to wrap it up, and they're kind of over it. They're like, maybe nothing ever happened here. Again, this hotel was on the news. Why? A few years before it was closed, a man had unalived his girlfriend in one of these hotel rooms. She was unfortunately, and he actually tried to cover it up before fleeing, and then the cops ended up finding him. So yes, there was a death that happened on the property. So they were trying to make contact with this woman, and again, nothing crazy out of this world was happening. Then they're kind of over it. They're getting ready to pack up. and out of nowhere, they hear the most outrageous and crazy, scary sounding, loud scream. And the writer says that they all gasped. They were literally like, now again, they had already walked the entire property. There was no one on the property but them. They all kind of split up into partners. They're looking around the whole property. There's no one around, no one outside, no one inside. So they literally do not know who or what made that scream. Now, stories like these make me think, because was it a ghost? Was it an actual person? And if it was an actual person, where were they? Why was it a woman that screamed? Kind of makes you think, is this place haunted? Or is it just coincidence? What do you think? If you guys are into spooky stories, anything paranormal, anything haunted, anything true crime, please make sure you follow. If you guys have a story that you'd like for me to read, please make sure that you send it via DM or email, because I'd love to read them. And I will see you guys in the next spooky story. Bye!
What would you do if the kid you were babysitting started acting so strange at night that you were even scared to go near his room? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about a girl who said that the kid she babysat was perfectly normal during the day and something entirely else after dark. I was 17 when this happened. I babysat all the time back then because it was easy money, and my aunt knew basically every family in town, so I got asked to help out a lot. This was for a couple I didn't know well, but it was a nice house, and they had one little boy, 6 years old, and I'll call him Noah. When I got there the first night, the mom was in a hurry, but in a tense way. She wasn't rude, she was just very distracted. And while she was showing me where snacks were and where the number list was, Noah was standing in the hallway behind her, looking at me. Just staring, not in a shy way. And before they left, his mom said one thing that stuck with me even then. She said, "If he talks in his sleep, don't answer from the hallway. It makes it worse." I thought she meant nightmares, and I said, okay. The first hour was normal. We watched a movie, had popcorn, brushed his teeth, and got ready for bed. He was actually very sweet. He was quieter than most kids, but not strange. I tucked him in and went downstairs. Around maybe 10:30, I heard him laughing upstairs. Not giggling, full laughing. It startled me because I figured he'd be asleep by then, and I went up and his room was dark except for the nightlight. He was in bed and his eyes were closed, still laughing. Then he stopped and said in a voice that did not sound sleepy at all, "She can hear us on the stairs." I froze. I asked if he was awake and he didn't answer. I went in, checked under the bed like an idiot, checked the closet, looked behind everything, and nothing was there. Noah still had his eyes closed, and I backed out and shut the door. I should have left then. I know that now. But I needed the money and I wanted a normal explanation, so I kept babysitting there. And it got worse every single time. On the second night, I heard him talking in his room and then heard another voice answer him. It wasn't loud, but not enough to make out words. Enough to know there were two. When I opened the door, he was asleep on his side facing the wall. And I told his mom the next day, and she got this look on her face like she was trying very hard not to react. She asked me one question. Did he get out of bed? I said no, and she looked relieved. The third time he was sitting up, in bed with his eyes closed when I checked on him. Actually sitting up, hands in his lap, smiling. He said, "Don't stand by the closet." I asked why, and he said, still with his eyes closed, "Because she likes teeth." His parents still left him with me after that, which I now think is insane, but at the same time, I think I told myself if they were his parents and they weren't panicking, maybe there was some medical explanation I just didn't understand. And one night I got there and his dad's face looked scratched. Thin lines down one cheek, and I didn't want to ask, and he didn't offer me an explanation either. By then, Noah had started drawing pictures constantly. Not kid scribbles either, the same thing over and over. A dark shape in a hallway, a bed, a little figure standing on the mattress. One time he drew a mouth with nothing around it and colored the inside black. I found one under the couch cushion while he was in the bathroom, and on the back he had written in uneven little kid letters, "She comes out bigger when I sleep." That was the last week I babysat there. The final night was bad from the second the parents left. Noah wouldn't look at me while I was making him dinner, and he kept glancing down the hall toward his bedroom and asking what time it was. At one point he said, "If I fall asleep before they get home, don't let her open me." I asked what that meant, and he shrugged and said, "That's just what she says." I almost called his parents right then, and I really should have. I got him into bed around 9:30, but he was terrified, like shaking, holding onto my arm, begging me to leave the lamp on, not just the nightlight. And I left his bedside lamp on and the bedroom door open a crack. At around 11, I heard him in there talking again. Not laughing this time, but arguing. I heard him say, "No, she isn't sleeping in here." I went upstairs and stood outside the door listening, and I could hear him breathing hard. Then he said, much quieter, "She can hear you now." I pushed the door open. Noah was standing barefoot on top of his bed, not jumping, just standing there facing the ceiling. And his smile was so wide I actually backed up without meaning to. His eyes were open, but not focused on me at all. He looked almost feverish. His lips were dry and stretched, and there was spit on his chin where it had run down. He slowly raised one arm and pointed at the closet. And from inside the closet, something said my name. It wasn't loud, just my name, in a woman's voice close to the door. I ran. I grabbed my keys, left every light in the house on, and called his parents from my car. I was crying so hard they could barely understand me. They came back in maybe 15 minutes, but I refused to go back inside while I waited. His dad went in first, and then his mom. When they came out, Noah was wrapped in a blanket and looked half asleep. His mother asked me very quietly if the closet voice had sounded like her, and I said no. And that was apparently the right answer because she started crying. I never babysat there again. My aunt got very angry with me over it because she thought I was being dramatic and hurting someone's reputation. I didn't care. I'd rather have no money than ever go back in that house. A year later, I saw Noah's mom at the grocery store, and she looked exhausted. I almost pretended not to see her, but she came up to me. She just said, "He's better in the daytime now." That was all. I still think about that sentence more than I want to. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
Let's read some creepy stories from New Orleans. I lived in a house in the Bywater for 3 incredible years. The landlord gloated upon us touring that he bought it post-Katrina and fixed it up. It was an ugly shithole before that, allegedly. Well, I'm there for a few months and occasionally feel some strange things, but I brush it off. Rent is cheap, the house is big, I'm poor. One day, while walking down the street and making some small talk with a neighbor a few houses down, she tells me the tea. There was a family of 4 living in the house during Katrina, and they all passed away. Great, love that, whatever. I'm poor, and I'm gonna pay them ghosts no mind and hope they pay me no mind right back. Everything was pretty calm until hurricane season came. In the lead up to hurricanes, while the weather was still calm but everyone's getting ready to hunker down, lights would flicker incessantly. Cupboard doors and bedroom doors would open or close, and light switches would turn on and off by themselves. The family would get really upset before hurricanes. One hurricane in particular, I had just come down with strep throat. Everyone evacuated because the water level was so high, but I stayed put because my car wasn't working and I was sick as a dog. As I laid on the couch floating in and out of fever dreams while the hurricane missed us entirely, the back door somehow opened to the backyard, and my dog was able to get in and out and go to the bathroom. I always thought that maybe they were looking out for me and my little boy when I wasn't able to. There are literal tears in my eyes right now. I feel so bad for that family that lost their lives in the hurricane, but that was so sweet that they opened the door for the dog. I'm about to start my period. That's so sweet. I stayed at the old number 77 2 years ago during Jazz Fest, and you could hear human footsteps pretty much all night long in our hotel room. The wood would just constantly creak right next to the bed, as if someone was walking around in the room, but there was no one there. I even told the ghost hi, and the creaking got really loud, as if it was trying to communicate back. It was crazy.
The worst places are those mini apartments that folks tend to rent out to young college people or whoever wants to live in them. The thing is, those little conveniently sized apartments are traditionally called slaves' quarters, because those are exactly what they were made for. Bad things happen in those now cute and expensive Airbnbs. No matter how many times a landlord tries to paint over all of the mold and history, those spaces are creepy as fuck. I've had many friends stay in some when in our early 20s. It's a good thing that they had month-to-month leases because they all wanted out. Bad. The most haunted place you can think of is that mansion in the quarter that Nicolas Cage once owned. Nobody is allowed inside, just outside. My brother is an electrician, and he was once escorted inside to fix something. He saw the scratches and blood marks from nails himself. He and the tour guide were happy to leave as fast as they could. OP also said in the comments that Nicolas Cage apparently noped out of there really quick because he kept hearing scratches in the floorboards. Maybe something didn't want him there. I had 2 interesting encounters last summer in New Orleans, and I just wanted to tell someone. I've never really considered myself to be sensitive, although I have seen a person who recently passed away. Last summer, I was in New Orleans with my husband, and we went on our typical run-of-the-mill ghost tour. The last stop was the La Laurie mansion. Suddenly something came over me, and I couldn't face the mansion, and I had this loud voice in my head tell me, "We don't acknowledge her." My husband asked me what was wrong, and I told him, "We don't acknowledge her." He looked incredibly confused, and I apologized and said, "I can't look at that place, I'm sorry." The next day, we went to the New Orleans Pharmacy Museum. While inside, my husband was immediately affected with a sharp headache. Meanwhile, I felt like someone was immediately attached to me, and he had his hands on my uterus. He was trying to touch my abdomen. I repeatedly heard in my head, "Let me look, I want to see." When we went upstairs to the top of the museum, my husband's headache became considerably worse. I got the sense that whoever was on me wanted him to leave, so it would be just me. After passing a particular exhibit case, my husband announced that we were leaving and to stay where I was and to not come to him. He just kept repeating, "I don't want to see you." As soon as we walked out the front door of the museum, his headache immediately cleared, and I could feel the man watching me leave. His frustration was palpable. He wanted to separate us. Later, back in the hotel, I did some research and found out the doctor who used to live there, the bottom was his pharmacy and the top was his living quarters, used to torture pregnant women. He would get them alone or away from a male companion and basically torture them until they're no longer alive. I recently had a baby, and I got this strong feeling that the doctor in the museum had never seen a uterus after childbirth, and he wanted to see. I also read that sometimes men experience strong and excruciating headaches and don't stay in the museum long, leaving their female companions, wives, girlfriends, whoever, alone. I've never been to New Orleans, but I want to go so bad, and it's not even that far from me. I would love to go there someday and do like a ghost tour. Let us know in the comments if you have any creepy stories from New Orleans.
Sullivan's Island Historic Cemetery is the type of place that you would miss if you weren't looking for it. It's marked by a simple wooden signpost on the corner of the lot, and many of the grave sites there are overgrown or missing entirely. And apparently there's a reason for that. I spent part of the day there yesterday because one of you sent me after sending me this photo. He says he can trace his family roots in South Carolina 8 generations on his father's side, and while there's more places that are more notoriously haunted, this place is by far the spookiest to him. He said, "Go there and you'll see what I'm talking about." The graveyard is about an acre and it sits tucked away near Station 22 and Patriot Street, not far from the old quarantine grounds. And Sullivan's Island has long served as a gateway to Charleston Harbor, and it was a place where ships stopped for inspection to keep out diseases like yellow fever and cholera. And in the 1800s, especially during epidemics, soldiers stationed nearby and soldiers who died in quarantine, along with local residents, including many from the island's African American community dating back to the 1870s, were buried in haste here in the sandy soil. And unlike the neatly kept military cemeteries nearby, parts of this ground have always been allowed to sort of grow wild. And that's because a lot of the people who are buried here passed very far from home and didn't have any family to sort of care for their grave sites. And so this part over here is what I want you to pay attention to. This overgrowth is apparently not random. It looks like the jungle one, but this part of the cemetery is where the stories of the restless soldiers live the strongest. Many who died here, whether from yellow fever outbreaks, accidents on the fort, or wounds that never really healed, were laid to rest quickly without full military honors or in unmarked plots when records were lost in the chaos of quarantine and war. Their spirits, the old accounts say, still stand watch on the island they defended. Eli, the local who told me to come here, said to keep an eye out for translucent figures in 19th century uniforms that move silently along the trees. I didn't see anything, but he also told me not to clear any vines or brush away from any of the grave sites or risk being followed by bad luck, because certain grave sites are left to the elements and allowed to be covered in plants as a kind of natural veil, keeping restless haints from wandering too far toward the living quarters or hiding the sites from those who might disturb them. The legend in his family is that a few of these unmarked plots hold men who died with unfinished business, like letters never sent home or promises unkept, or simply the shock of dying so young and so far from home. Eli says he likes to come here to pay respect, but it was this one shot that he took in the thickest tangle of the branches, and he said once you see it, you can't unsee it, but it's right there on the right side of the screen. It looks to be a translucent figure, and he said he didn't see anyone standing there when he was taking the photo, and he was there alone, but he believes it's a soldier standing guard. So I went to this exact same spot, and I took this video, and I sent it to him, and I said, I went there, and the energy felt heavy, but I didn't see anything. And he said, what are you talking about? You can see a soldier marching. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, look at that thing marching across the screen. This is it zoomed in. I don't know what to make of it. It doesn't seem to follow the light of the sun or the movement of the camera. And I've played it over and over trying to make sense of it, and I don't know what it is. It could be nothing, or it could be exactly what he was talking about. It appears and disappears as quickly as it shows up, but let me know what you all think. This is my first attempt at doing a video like this. Normally I just present stories, and I have many stories coming. Different parts of Charleston while I'm here, so thank you all to everyone who sent suggestions. I'm trying to hit as many of them as I can. Bear with me while I try to figure out the best way to present these stories with the footage that I've caught.
Oh, this one gives me chills. So this man named Jim tells this story that happened to him from when he was in college. So his girlfriend had a younger sister, and this younger sister happened to have had a twin, but unfortunately she passed away at birth. So Jim's girlfriend's family always claimed that their home was haunted by the twin of this sister. Family members would say that they would frequently see or feel things. Jim said that he wasn't much of a believer in the paranormal, but when the family would bring it up, he wouldn't put up much of a fight because he just kind of wanted to keep the peace. During the summer of sophomore and junior year, Jim did say that he would go and hang out with the family for extended periods of time. 4th of July, weekends at the lake, birthday celebrations, etc. So one day, after lounging around the pool, he and his girlfriend decided that they were going to go hang up in her room for a little while. He said nothing scandalous. They were just relaxing and listening to some music with the door open, of course. And then after a little while, they hear her mother call up, "Hey guys, dinner's ready, come on down." So they get up and gather themselves and go to head downstairs. And on their way through the hallway upstairs, they did pop their head in the sister's room to let her know it's time to go down. So they peeked their head in the door, and they said that the sister was sitting across the room at her vanity, just brushing her hair. And Jim says, "Hey, dinner's ready, you coming?" And he said that she slowly looked up at him, meeting his gaze in the mirror, and just shook her head no. He says she didn't even say a word, just the slow nodding. So he's thinking to himself, okay, whatever, see you down there. And they continue on downstairs. Once they get down to the bottom of the stairs, they look across into the living room, and lo and behold, sits her sister, sitting on the couch with a friend who had come over. And apparently, the sister and her friend had been sitting in front of the TV for the past 40 minutes. So they immediately sprint back up to the sister's room. And sure enough, when they open that door, there's nobody in there. Jim says that to this day, he is freaked out about it, and it still gives him chills. You know, that is creepy, but it's also kind of nice knowing that sister still hangs around and is enjoying herself in the house amongst them. So what are your thoughts? Like, would you sort of welcome that sister that just sort of pops in and out whenever, or would you be too freaked out for her to be around? And hey, if you have a creepy story of your own, I would love to hear it. And if you're new here, follow for more creepy story time.
How many of you guys believe that some people get to say their last goodbyes before they part to the afterlife? So this next story was sent to me by somebody who wants to remain anonymous, so we're going to name her Sandra. So Sandra said that she was working in the fields and she was carpooling. So I guess at the time they were going back home, and it was like five other ladies in the car, and one of the ladies gets a call, and it's her daughter, I guess. So she's having this conversation with her daughter that goes on about for 5 minutes. But when they hang up, she says that she notices that the lady looked very sad. So they asked her, hey, is everything okay? And she mentioned how she felt her daughter was saying her last goodbyes. And she felt uneasy, like something wasn't right. So they asked her to kind of explain what exactly her daughter said. And so she just says that, she just told her that she really loved her and to look after her kids if anything were to happen to her. And I guess the lady found that very awkward. Like, why is my daughter saying this? Like, does she have a feeling something's gonna happen? So everybody tries to comfort her, like everything's gonna be fine, right? But then so they notice that there is an accident up ahead. And by the traffic, they know that it's a pretty bad accident. So I guess they're getting closer, and the lady that got the phone call starts panicking, and they start asking her, like, what's wrong? And she starts screaming, that's my daughter's car, that's my daughter's car. So when they finally approach the accident, right, it is indeed the lady's daughter. And unfortunately, she did lose her life in that accident. So I guess the lady ends up running off the car, and some of the girls get off with her because she's so frantic and they're trying to help her. So when they talk to police officers, they find out that that accident had happened about an hour before the girls even arrived there. So when that lady got that phone call in the car, this girl, her daughter, had already unfortunately passed away. And everybody was in shock and disbelief because they seen her get the call and they heard her having that conversation. And I guess the accident was pretty bad. They had to extract her from the vehicle. And she said that the comfort that she had was knowing that she got to say her last goodbyes to her daughter, even though she has no idea how her daughter made that call if she had already passed away.
If mimics are real, then they probably exist in this one specific spot. Now, you've probably heard of the Appalachia, the Pacific Northwest, or even northern Mexico being hotspots for mimic activity. But this one specific area has more reports of encounters with these mimic-like beings than any other place in the world. And this is Big Bend National Park in western Texas. Now, there was this man named Cole. Cole said during this period of his life, he was attending college in Kansas. And it had just became spring break. He had about a week off of school, and he was looking for a place to stay because he wasn't getting along with his parents. So he had this grandmother that lived near Big Bend National Park. And he figured because they were really close, she'd probably let him stay there and he wouldn't have to deal with his family. So he drives down from Kansas all the way to Texas, and he arrives at his grandmother's house. When he gets to the front door and he knocks, he doesn't hear anything. His grandmother doesn't answer. So he tries for the handle, tries to open the door, but the door is locked, which is unusual because his grandmother always kept the door unlocked. So he knocks again, and he knocks a third time, and still no response. So he figured maybe she's doing something, she can't hear me. Now he knew in the backyard there was a hiding spot where there was this key. So he goes around the house, and when he gets to the backyard, he notices that the back door is wide open. So he immediately runs inside the house, and he's like, grandmother, like, are you here? And he doesn't hear her. When he goes into the kitchen, he sees his grandmother. She is turned around facing the cabinets, and she's doing something with her hands over and over again. So it kind of looked like she was clapping or doing some kind of game. And he says, "Hey, grandmother, it's Cole. I'm home from college, and, I'm so excited to see you. I was hoping I could stay here for a week." She doesn't respond. She just keeps doing this thing with her hands. So once again, he says, "Grandmother, aren't you happy to see me? I'm home from college." And once again, she is quiet. So he says, "Okay, grandmother, I'm going to go to the spare bedroom and unpack, and maybe I'll catch up with you later." So he goes to this spare bedroom, and he unpacks his things, and he gets settled in. We said the rest of the night, his grandmother was acting strange. She would randomly appear in spots around the house, just kind of with her head down and pacing back and forth. Well, as the sun started to go down and it was getting dark, he lay there in his bed reading a book. And that's when, out of the corner of his eye, he seen something move past the door. And he heard the shuffling of small feet. And as he looks again, he sees his grandmother. She is pacing back and forth down the hallway with her head down, kind of waving her shoulders, and she's going continuously back and forth. So he's like, "Grandma, what are you doing? Are you okay? Is everything all right?" And she doesn't respond. So he thinks to himself, okay, maybe she's just not feeling good. So eventually he falls asleep, and in the middle of the night, he's awoken. And as he gets up and he turns over, he sees his grandmother standing right next to his bed, staring at him. She has her head down, and he said she got this big grin on her face. And then she began to laugh hysterically. "Ah, ha, 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 ah, ha, 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 ah, ha, ha, ha," like he had never heard before. And he said she just started swaying back and forth, just staring at him. So he jumps up out of bed, and he runs out into the hallway, and he goes into the living room, and he's like, something is wrong with my grandma. And he takes a second, he calms himself down, and he's like, I need to go back in and figure out what's going on. So he makes his way down the hallway, and he goes back into the bedroom. And that's when he sees grandmother. She's over in the corner of the room with her head down. And he's like, "Grandma? Grandma, are you okay?" He said that's when she started laughing again, hysterically. And the next thing he knows, she turns and she lunges right at him. And he had never seen an older person move like that or jump like that. So he took off running out the door, all the way out of the house. He jumps in his car. This whole time, she is chasing him. As he gets the car started, he drives off. And he gets a ways down the street. And as he turns and looks out the back window, he sees his grandmother is still following and running along behind the car. Eventually, he loses her. And as he's driving down the road, he grabs his cell phone. And he says, I got to call my parents. Something is wrong with grandma. So he calls his mom. And he's like, "Mom, there's something going on with grandma. You need to get down here. Or maybe we need to call someone. Something is going on." And his mom's like, "Cole, what are you talking about, honey?" And he goes, "There's something wrong with grandma. I went to her house and she's acting strange." She goes, "Cole, grandma always goes for 2 or 3 weeks to New York this time to visit family." And he said immediately his stomach sank because he knew that wasn't his grandmother. There's a story out of Utah. There was this hunter who was east of Salt Lake, up in the mountains, on this 100-acre hunting preserve. And one night, he was up in his tree stand. he had basically been out all day long. It started to get dark when he catches sights on this very large deer. And he sees it coming through this field. And as he's watching this thing, it looks directly at him, and then it takes off running into the woods. Well, it was almost as if something had scared this deer. And that's when this hunter realizes it had just gotten very quiet. And so he started to get this uneasy feeling like he wasn't alone. And then he hears a voice calling up to him saying, "Please help me. I'm down here. Come down from the tree stand." And he looks over the stand and he sees the back of someone kind of hiding to the point where he can't see his face. He can't see the front of him, but he can see the back outline of him. So the hunter is kind of like petrified because there's not supposed to be anyone out there. And once again, this man calls up to him, "Please help me. Come down from the tree stand." So he says to this man, "Look, I don't know who you are, so I need you to step away from the tree stand, step back to where I can see your face and I can see your hands." But after he says this, it goes quiet. So he looks down from the tree stand again. There's no one there. So as he's sitting up in this tree stand, he starts to wonder, what's going to happen? Do I get down from the tree stand? Do I take off back to camp? Or do I stay up here and have the higher ground? After about 20, 30 minutes, he doesn't hear or see anything. So he thinks, okay, I'm going to run as fast as I can and make it back to camp. So he gets down from the tree stand and he just starts running. And as he's running through the woods, he begins to hear something behind him. As he looks around, he can see this man. He is following him and he's gaining on him quick. So he runs a little bit faster and he keeps looking over his shoulder. And at that point, he loses his balance and he falls flat on his face. And as he's on the ground, he knows he has to get up. He starts pushing himself upward. And as he turns his head and he looks, he sees this man. And this man looks exactly like him, except his face is slightly rubbery. His hair is slightly off. His eye color is different, but it's the exact replica of him. And right at that moment, he thinks this is it. But then he hears his buddies yelling his name. And they come running to him. "Are you all right? Is everything okay?" They said, "We got worried because you didn't come back to camp. So we wanted to check on you." And as he looks around, this man was gone. But he still, to this day, is haunted by the image of this man who looked exactly like him. This story comes out of the Roanoke Valley region of Virginia. There was this family from New York who had lived in the city most of their life. They wanted to get away and, live that remote urban life. So they find this beautiful home on 16 acres in this secluded area of the Roanoke Valley in the Appalachian Mountains. And their first day moving in, the father, he notices something weird. The neighbor actually comes not to greet them, not to welcome them to the area, but to warn them. And he says very specifically, at night, make sure you lock your doors and your windows and you close the curtains. And he said, it's very important. There is something out there. And he goes, "You mean the people in this area are really like that you have to lock your doors?" And he goes, "I'm not talking about people. It's something else. But that's all I'm going to say. Now just remember, lock your doors and your windows at night. You'll be all right." So the neighbor leaves. Well, the father kind of just shakes it off and is like, okay, whatever. So they live there for several months, and they really enjoy their new life. Well, this one particular night, the family is sitting in the living room and they have a fire going. That's when the father notices that the son is standing next to the window and he's staring at something very intently. And so he asks the son, what are you staring at? What's out there? And he goes, "Father, there's a boy out there. There's this young boy. Can I go and play with him?" And the father's like, "What are you talking about? There's no boy around here. We live in the woods. There's no one around here." And he's like, "No, Father, there's a boy out there. There's a boy out there." And the father's like, "You know what? Just, it's time for bed. Go to bed." And he doesn't really think anything of it. Over the next couple of weeks, the son keeps looking out the window at something and telling his father, "There's this boy outside." And he keeps drawing pictures of this boy and he keeps saying, "I really want to play with that boy." The father at the time just thinks, this is something to do with them moving and his active imagination. Until one night, the whole family is asleep. When the father wakes to a sound coming from the living room, he gets his wife up and he's like, I think someone's in the house. I think someone's broken in. Like, go and get the children, make sure they're safe. So he gets up, he goes down the hallway very slowly. And when he gets to the living room and he flips on the light, there's his son on the floor playing with his toys. And the front door is wide open. So he asks the son, like, what are you doing up? Why are you out of bed? And he goes, Father, I'm playing with the boy. And he goes, what boy? What are you talking about? He said, the boy, he came inside and he was playing with me. And his father's like, there is no boy here. Like, there's no one around here that is your age. So he tells his son to go to bed. He goes to the front door and he, peers out. There's no one out there. He closes the door. Well, up until this point, he had been keeping this door unlocked because he felt like, we live in the woods, nothing's going to happen. But that night, he starts locking the door. Well, the next couple of weeks, right, is when they started to hear this banging sound at the front door, like someone was there. And when the father would go and answer the door, there would be no one there. And eventually, the father gets so frustrated and angry with whoever's knocking at the door that one night he hears the knocking. He goes to the front door, he opens it, and, he goes out on the porch and he starts screaming, what are you doing at my house? Like, leave us alone, leave my family alone, like, quit. And all of a sudden, he hears his name being called. And it sounds like a child's voice. And it's telling him to come out into the woods. So this father, like, kind of makes his way back inside, closes the door, and locks it. And at this point, he's like, something is definitely going on. So the next day, he goes into town and he goes to the local hardware store. And he talks with some of the locals. And he starts telling them, I think something's after my family. I think something is trying to, like, scare us. And the locals say, look, we're not trying to be rude, but you need to take your family and get out of here and move back to town if you know what's best for you. And the father takes this as, oh, they're trying to scare me out of town because I'm from the city. So he goes back home and is like, they're not going to scare us. At this point, though, the family is so terrified that they are all sleeping in the same bedroom. And after a couple nights of them sleeping in the bedroom together, the father wakes up and he sees his son standing next to the window and he's staring at something. And he's like, what are you looking at? Like, what is out there? What is out there? And he goes, they're here. They're here, Father. They're here. They're here. And he's like, who's here? And he's like, go back in the bed right now. He goes up to the window. And when he peers out, he sees all of these children standing around the house. And they have these bright, glowing white eyes. So he hurried up, he closes the curtains, and he gets in bed and he holds his son and he tells him, go to sleep. The next few days, he's very nervous. He's very on edge, but he doesn't know what to do. That night, he goes to bed with the family in the bedroom. He wakes up and he discovers his family is all gone. He searches the entire home. They are nowhere. The only thing he finds is that the front door is open. So he figures they've taken his family out into the woods. So he runs as fast as he can out into the woods and he starts screaming, where's my family? Give me back my family. And all of a sudden, he hears some movement coming through the woods. And out of the shadows steps this young boy. And as this boy takes a couple steps closer, he realizes it's his son. And he has these glowing white eyes. And he looks at his father and he says, not yet. And the father takes off running as fast as he can back to the house. He gets in his car, he drives into town and goes to the local pub. And he starts screaming to them, like, they've got my family, they've taken my family, like, you have to help me. And then he runs out of the bar and he leaves. And that was the last time that they ever seen this man or his family ever again. Fast food workers have a lot of creepy experiences. Now, there was this woman named Katie. Katie worked at a fast food joint, and she would often work third shift from 10 p.m. until 8 the next morning. And it would always be her working drive-thru with her coworker Mike, who'd work the grill. And she said one night she was working, it was about midnight, and Mike started to feel sick. So she tells Mike, it's been kind of a slow night, like, you seem really sick, go home, get some sleep, I can handle this. So Mike says, are you sure? And she says, yeah, I can get this. So Mike gets in his car and he leaves. And now she is there alone. For about an hour, no one comes through the drive-thru. But then all of a sudden, she hears the drive-thru thing alert her that someone is there. But when she goes over to the screen where she can see the camera, there is no one there. But the headset turns on by itself. And that's when she starts hearing someone talking to her. But she's looking at the camera and she can see absolutely no one is out there. She hears this voice that sounds eerily familiar. It is her voice. And her voice is telling her to come outside of the restaurant, that they want to show them something. And she goes, no, I cannot come out, like I'm working, like I cannot leave the building. And over again, they keep telling her, come out of the restaurant, come out of the restaurant. But she doesn't see anyone in the camera. And she is like, who is this? Like, am I someone messing with me? So she finally takes the headset off and starts like just walking around. It's like, okay, I need to just clear my head. Like maybe I'm just imagining this. So then she puts the headset back on. She says, hello, are you still there? But it's not, there is no one there. And as she looks at the camera again, there was no one out front. So she goes back to the front of this restaurant and she starts preparing some fries. As she's making a fresh batch of fries, she got this feeling like she was being watched. And as she turns and she looks out the drive-thru window, she sees a girl staring at her. She's standing in the parking lot and she's looking directly at her. And she's like freaked out, who is this girl? Why is she here? Like, what is going on? She said all of a sudden this girl just kind of pointed at her and made a circle with her finger. So she goes to the back of the kitchen and she is like, what do I do? Like, is this real? Is this, what's going on? So she said she went back into the front and she looks out the drive-thru window. There's no one there. So after about 15, 20 minutes, she kind of forgets about it. And it was like, I just must be tired. As she's in the front again, working on something, she gets a feeling like she's being watched again. And when she turns, there's that girl staring at her, but she is right up against the drive-thru window. And her eyes are open wide. She has this big smile on her face. And as Katie can clearly see, she is looking at a mirrored version of herself. And she said the girl just waved by and then took off running out of the parking lot. So the next day, she tells her manager about all this. And as they roll the security cameras, they can see absolutely no one in the parking lot. And she still to this day believes she had some kind of encounter working third shift at the fast food restaurant.
Want to get creeped out? Have you heard of the Dark Watchers in the Santa Lucia Mountains? On California's central coast, hikers have reported seeing what has been deemed Dark Watchers, and they are super creepy. They'll typically see a very tall, human-shaped figure, often holding a walking stick and wearing a hat. The figure will stay completely still, just watching the hiker. When the hiker gets the balls to step closer and see what's up, the figure vanishes instantly into fog. There are dozens of accounts of hikers who have seen this in the Santa Lucia Mountains, and the descriptions of what these things look like are always very consistent. 7 to 10 feet tall, so fucking tall, human-like silhouette, the walking stick, the hat. No one's ever interacted with one, but they do not speak, they do not move, they simply watch. Instantly, my mind goes, is this aliens? Because, aliens have been known to watch us and see what we're up to, probably judge the fuck out of us. The crazy thing is reports of this have been going back hundreds, maybe thousands of years. The earliest written accounts date back to the 1700s. Spanish colonists actually named them Los Vigilantes Obscuros, so creepy, which translates to the Dark Watchers. In 1937, a man named Robinson Jeffers wrote about these shadow figures. He said, forms that look human to human eyes, but certainly are not human. Then in 1938, a man named John Steinbeck wrote about them. He grew up near Salinas, California. Apparently, his mother used to leave fruits and nuts as offerings for these Dark Watchers when she was a child on her way to school. Upon her return, she would find flowers in their place. What are these things? Are they aliens? Are they the Fae? Are they shadow people? In 2017, Steinbeck's son, Thomas Steinbeck, wrote a book about the Dark Dark Watchers. I have to read this thing. There are similar beings in other mountainous regions worldwide. For instance, I'm probably going to butcher this, Amphia the big gray man. This creature is said to follow hikers on Ben Macdoy, which is the highest peak in Scotland's Cairngorms. If I pronounced any of that wrong, yell at me, and I'm sorry. Now, some researchers suggest that why people are seeing these Dark Watchers is because of pareidolia, which is the human tendency to see meaningful shapes when none exist, which means seeing human figures or human faces in natural landscapes. Or meteorologist Jan Null suggests that when the sun is low, that a hiker could be seeing their own shadow in the mist or fog. The shadow could appear huge and distorted, but then can vanish instantly with a sudden shift. I don't know if I'm buying those theories with this one. It's so weird that so many people are seeing the same figures and with walking sticks and hats. I don't know. What do you guys think these things are?
I was driving across the state and I kept passing the same car over and over again. So this happened last year when I was driving alone across the state to go see some family. I left around 9 p.m. It was a 6-hour drive, so a lot of the drive was in the dark. At first, everything was completely normal. It was just long stretches of highway, not that many cars, until I noticed something. About 2 hours in, I noticed a dark SUV car driving behind me. I didn't think too much of it. It was just another car on the road, right? Eventually, they got over, they went, and they passed me, and that was that. As they were passing me, I kind of just glanced over. You couldn't see much because it was so dark. You just could kind of see a little outline of a person. About 20 minutes later, I saw this SUV again. I was driving past and they were pulled over on the road this time. They had the car off, the lights were off, and as I passed it, I got this weird, heavy feeling in my chest. Another 15-20 minutes go by, and there it is again. The same SUV driving past me. I'm trying not to think too much of it at this point, but I definitely am noticing this car, right? Anyways, they slowly pass me, and that's that. 10 minutes down the road, they are pulled over again on the side of the road. Car off, lights off. This is a very weird coincidence. There is no reason for them to be pulled over. There are no exits anywhere nearby. There's no reason that they need to keep getting ahead of me and pulling over. So this time I push my pedal a little harder to try to get some distance between us, and I'm speeding ahead. Before you know it, I have headlights behind me, and it's the same SUV, the same dark windows, but this time they're driving fast, too fast. Before I can even react, they're right on me, and then they swerve over to the next lane, and I'm thinking they're gonna pass me again, but they don't. They stay right next to me, matching my speed. I'm feeling like they're looking over at me. You know when you can just feel that somebody's watching you? Yeah, I got that feeling. After a few seconds, I force myself to glance over, and as I do, they're looking right at me. They're not even looking at the road. They're looking at me, and they're grinning. I wish I never looked over. After that happened, they sped ahead. I didn't come across them for another hour, thank heavens. I'm praying that this is over. I don't know what that was. Anyways, as I look ahead, there's actually a roadblock. It has a bunch of police officers, and they're stopping every single vehicle. And they get to my car, and they ask me if I've seen a dark SUV. I felt ill after he asked me that. He looks at me a little hesitant, and he said, okay, did they try to get you to, pull over? And I said, no. And they said, okay, if you pass the dark SUV again, do not stop driving, keep going. He never told me why, but just to keep going. He waved me through. I finished my drive in peace. I did not come across this SUV again. This is the part that really bothers me, though, is a couple days later I got curious, and so I looked it up. There was a report from that same exact night, and it was of a vehicle that matched that exact description that I saw. There was no driver, there's no sign of anybody leaving, but it was found abandoned on the side of the road, hours before I even saw it.
On the morning of Monday, January 7th, 1985, a 31-year-old man arrived at an international airport in order to board his flight to the United States. The man was very nervous. His heart was beating fast, and his palms were sweating so much that he could barely hold the handles of his very heavy, tan-colored suitcase. And the reason he was so nervous is because he was feeling very conflicted about what he was about to do. On the one hand, this trip was something he'd been dreaming of for months, and it was supposed to represent the start of a great brand new life. Now, this man hadn't actually packed very many personal items to take with him. But one thing he had brought was a little bound book full of photographs, which showed what mattered the most to him. And what mattered the most was waiting for him in America. But on the other hand, the man was terrified, because before he could begin this brand new life, he had a huge problem he needed to take care of. And that problem was why he needed to drop off his very heavy suitcase without anybody looking inside of it. And so now, inside the airport, the very nervous man stopped and readjusted his grip on the suitcase handles, and then made his way over to the ticketing area, where he would check his bag for his almost 11-hour flight to California. And then, once he touched down and they landed in California, he could get off the plane, go to the baggage carousel, and get his luggage, and then everything would be fine. Now, of course, he knew this was a big gamble. If it had been possible, he would have just brought this bag with him on the plane to stow it in the overhead bin, but he just couldn't do it because the bag was too big, too heavy. And so really his only other choice, if he wanted the suitcase to make it to California, was to check it like he was doing, because the alternative was leaving it behind, and there was no way he was going to do that. He cared far too much about what was inside of this luggage. And so by the time the man actually got in line in the ticketing and baggage check area, he was so stressed out that he was beginning to feel physically ill. By the time he got to the front of the line, he still felt very sick, but he composed himself enough that he walked up to the counter of the airline he was traveling with, which was Lufthansa Airline, and the employee who was working behind the counter was very cheerful, and they greeted the man and took his passport to verify his information. Then the employee put down the passport and then reached out his hand and gestured for the nervous man to give him his very important suitcase. This was, of course, the moment the man had feared the most, when everything could really go astray. But as calm as he could, he lifted up the suitcase, and for a second he almost panicked because it was just so obviously heavy. He realized the employee might make him open it right there because it just seemed wrong that this suitcase was that heavy. And he knew if that happened, he was done for. He'd be arrested immediately. But instead, the employee just dragged the heavy suitcase over to a conveyor belt behind the counter, and the nervous man watched as the employee heaved the suitcase onto the belt, and the man kept his eyes locked on the suitcase as it rolled down the belt and then disappeared through a pair of rubber flaps at the very end. He was so focused on the bag, he almost didn't notice the airline employee returning to try to hand him his boarding pass for the plane. Finally, the employee literally just waved the ticket in the man's face to get his attention, and it kind of snapped him out of it, and he took the boarding pass, and as calmly as he could, he thanked the employee, and then he turned and hurried off to catch his flight. About 12 hours later, on the other side of the world, another employee of Lufthansa Airlines walked around the baggage claim area at Los Angeles International Airport, which is typically just called LAX. It was about 2 p.m. Los Angeles time, and the employee was working in the international terminal. It was his job to monitor the circular carousels where passengers picked up their luggage after their flights, and his job was to make sure no bags were left behind. And as he was making one of these loops, he noticed there was a tan-colored suitcase with soft sides sitting all alone on one of the carousels. The employee stopped and checked the monitor above the carousel to see the last time this carousel had been used by an incoming plane, and it was quite a while ago, and all the passengers clearly had come through and picked up their luggage, except for this one lone bag. So, based on the timing, the employee figured that, this bag must be unclaimed. But this was not remotely concerning to him. Luggage went unclaimed all the time. Sometimes because bags were sent to the wrong airport, or because the suitcase's owner missed their flight, or even just forgot to get it. But whatever the reason was, it was this employee's job to simply start the process of identifying the owner of the suitcase. So, like he always did, he walked over to the carousel and grabbed the suitcase handle and went to pick it up. But when he did, he let out a sort of surprised grunt and stumbled because the suitcase was so much heavier than he had expected. So he went back and he grabbed the handle with a better grip this time with two hands and braced himself and yanked, and the suitcase kind of toppled over and fell off the carousel onto the floor. And this was also around the time that the employee noticed that this really heavy suitcase had no tags on it. And so now this bag did seem very unusual. The extreme weight and no tags, that's not normal. So he knelt down and he began to unzip the suitcase to see what was inside. He was legally allowed to do this because unclaimed bags at airports are subject to search. But he had only unzipped it a little bit before he froze, and for a second he just stared in shock at what was inside of the suitcase.
Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
Meaning, sometimes when people would go to these smugglers to try to get help to go to these other countries, sometimes the smuggler wouldn't help them. They would just rob them, or in some cases, rob them and then kill them and dispose of their body. And unfortunately, again, because there's no regulation or oversight, A lot of times these horrible crimes would just go unnoticed. And so maybe if that's what had happened to Raven's Jane Doe, it would explain why the tags were ripped off the suitcase. The smuggler who, committed this crime would not have wanted to leave any ID on or around the body that could be traced back to them. And so Ravens picked up his phone to call the LAX airport operations manager to see if he could get the logs for any flights coming from Peru to LAX on the day the body was found. And that was when he discovered there was a big problem with this theory, because there were no flights from Peru. The only flights that day that used the luggage carousel where the body was found were from Korea, Japan, and Germany. And there weren't any flights that originated in Peru that had layovers in those countries either, which meant it just wasn't possible that his Jane Doe was Juan's wife. And so now Ravens was stumped all over again. He had almost no evidence to go on. All he really had was the suitcase and the body. And the actual crime scene itself was maybe somewhere in Korea or Japan or Germany. And so Ravens really didn't have a good idea of where he should begin looking for more evidence. But then he got an idea. Detective Ravens got up from his desk and headed straight to the evidence room. He put on a pair of disposable gloves and he found the box that contained evidence from Jane Doe's case, and he opened it up. And there really wasn't much. All that was in there were pieces of jewelry and some clothing that were found on the woman's body. And all of it had already been examined for trace evidence like blood or hair. However, blood and hair were not what Ravens was looking for. One at a time, he lifted out each of the sealed plastic bags that contained Jane Doe's belongings until he got to her blue sweater. He took the sweater out of the plastic and he turned it over in his hands and then checked inside the neckband. And there he found exactly what he was looking for. Immediately, he felt a rush of adrenaline. He was onto something here. And so he reached back into the box and he grabbed another plastic bag with a pair of gray pants in it. And he did the same thing. He looked at the waistband. Then he opened a third bag and he checked inside of her blouse. And each time, his hunch had been right. Jane Doe's clothing had labels sewn into them. And the labels were clearly written in some language that was not English. Ravens wasn't sure, but to him, he thought maybe the letters looked Middle Eastern. It didn't take long for the FBI to help Ravens and the LAPD identify the origin of Jane Doe's clothing. All of it had been made in the Middle East, in Iran. This meant that finally, Detective Ravens had a likely country of origin for his Jane Doe. But he also had another problem now. Really, he had the same problem he'd had when he thought his victim was from Peru. And that was that there were only 3 international flights that his Jane Doe could have been on. And none of them originated in Iran. And there were no connecting flights from Iran that day either. And so Ravens needed the public's help. On Thursday, so 3 days after the body was found, he and another detective sat down with a reporter from the city's newspaper, the Los Angeles Times, a publication that's read all over the world. And Raven and this other detective's goal was, to give as many updates as they could about the case, hoping that somebody somewhere would read the story, recognize a detail, and come forward. However, that's not really how the interview played out. By the end of it, Ravens was feeling pretty discouraged by all the questions he and his partner just couldn't answer. In fact, the last thing he said to the reporter, which ended up getting printed as the sort of last line of the story, the lasting impression, if you will, was, "Don't be too surprised if you never find out where she came from or who she is." The next morning, Detective Ravens got to his office and had barely taken off his coat when his phone rang. A police officer from Sacramento, California was on the other line, and he sounded all worked up. He told Ravens that he knew that, the LA investigators had been working on the airport Jane Doe case, and even though it wasn't going anywhere, he knew it was a big deal for them. But he told Ravens that he actually had this unbelievable development in Northern California that was connected to the airport Jane Doe case. He said authorities in Northern California had just found another body. But when Ravens heard this, his first reaction was not excitement that there was new evidence or something. It was confusion. He didn't need another body. He needed to find his Jane Doe's name. And so he asked the Sacramento officer, what he meant. Had they found another woman in another suitcase or something? But the Sacramento officer said no. The body belonged to a man, and this guy's name had never even been on police radar. He had died from a gunshot wound, 400 miles away from Raven's Jane Doe. But the officer said that the story they had uncovered behind this new body would likely solve Raven's Jane Doe case. This is the story that the Sacramento officer told Ravens. On the evening of Monday, January 7th, just a few hours after Jane Doe's body had been found at LAX, a man named Hadi had picked up his friend and roommate, a 31-year-old man named Mahmoud Ayazi, at the Sacramento airport. which is about 400 miles north of LAX. Hadi was excited to see Mahmoud, who had been away for a few weeks. They were good friends, and Mahmoud was always very optimistic and fun to be around. But on this day, when Mahmoud got in his car, Hadi immediately noticed that his friend seemed sullen and quiet and just very clearly upset about something. And so Hadi asked him what was wrong. And Mahmoud just said, "Oh, I'm sick with the flu." But to Hadi, Mahmoud did not look very sick. He looked worried and kind of jittery and nervous. And as they started to drive, he kept looking out the windows and out the back of the car, like he was nervous about somebody following them or something. And when they got back to their apartment, Mahmoud went straight to bed. And for the next 2 days, Mahmoud continued acting increasingly weird and paranoid. He asked Hadi to disconnect the phone in their apartment and said he didn't want to see any of their mutual friends. He also kept looking out the windows of their apartment, but whenever Hadi asked what was wrong, Mahmoud refused to explain. But then he immediately got to his feet, just left the bag there, and ran to go find a phone to call the police. A little less than 2 hours later, around 3:45 p.m., Detective Don Ravens of the Los Angeles Police Department's Pacific Division stood in the baggage area of LAX's International Terminal, looking down grimly into the tan suitcase that was lying open on the floor. He was surrounded by officials from the LAPD, as well as the FBI, who had all been called to the airport because of what was found inside of the suitcase: the dead body of a young woman. Detective Ravens was shocked. He guessed this woman was maybe less than 30 years old, and judging by her features and dark hair, he thought she could be from an Asian or Latin American country. But that was about as far as he could get, since she didn't have any identification with her, and there were no tags on the bag. There were also no obvious wounds on her body, so he couldn't immediately tell how she died. Raven spent some time speaking to airline and airport employees, including Customs, which is the government agency that's in charge of inspecting bags that are coming in and out of the country. And he was puzzled as to how a suitcase with a body inside of it had somehow cleared Customs. But an agent explained that they didn't actually open up all the suitcases, which meant whoever checked this bag through Customs had taken a huge risk, because realistically, they could have been searched and then the body would have been found. So this suggested a certain level of desperation. But apparently this risk this person took to check the bag had paid off, because the bag had gone all the way to California. But despite that, Ravens didn't find much to go on here. At this moment, the victim was a Jane Doe, which meant there was no identification for her. And Ravens knew she could really be from anywhere in the world, despite, his snap judgment that perhaps she was from an Asian or Latin American country. And because LAX was an international airport, whoever checked this bag and potentially even put her into the suitcase could now be anywhere in the world too. Once Detective Ravens and the other investigators had finished examining the body as it was found inside of the suitcase, they didn't actually pull her body out. They sent the suitcase and her body to the coroner. Hopefully, an autopsy would turn up evidence that could tell Ravens and the other investigators who this Jane Doe was and what happened to her. The following day, on Tuesday, Ravens sat down at his desk and he opened up a manila folder he had been given. Inside of it was his Jane Doe's autopsy report. And when the detective began reading it, he couldn't help but feel sick, because what he was reading told him that this poor woman had died a horrible, torturous death. The report said the woman had bruises all over her body, like the kind you would get from repeated heavy blows delivered over a period of at least several hours while she was still alive, and her actual eventual cause of death was ultimately suffocation, which meant she either was suffocated and then put into the suitcase, or was in the suitcase, trapped inside of there, and suffocated. Ravens put down the report and leaned back in his chair and just sort of thought through what he had just learned. Based on the autopsy, he now knew this poor woman had died a brutal, awful death, but the coroner had not found any identifying information or anything on her that would give away or help to give away who she actually was or who did this to her. So really he had very little here other than knowing this lady suffered. Ravens had spent the last 24 hours poring over all the surveillance footage from the airport security cameras, looking for any suspicious passengers leaving without any luggage. But nothing had jumped out at him. He'd also interviewed a bunch of airport employees who would have been in the baggage claim area on the day the body was found, but none of them had noticed anything strange either. And so, despite it only having been 1 day since this woman was found, Ravens was already worried that this case was going to go cold. But what Ravens had not counted on was the huge amount of publicity his Jane Doe would generate. The TV news, as well as the newspapers, were reporting feverishly on the body that was found in the LAX suitcase. And by Wednesday, so 48 hours after the body was found, the reporting had made it all the way to Peru, where a man named Juan Espinoza contacted authorities to report that the body might actually belong to his wife. Officials in Peru called the LAPD, and Juan's report ended up on Raven's desk. Ravens opened up that report and began reading. Juan and his wife lived in Peru's capital city of Lima, but his wife had been trying to leave Peru to escape poverty. She had left their home hoping to basically sneak into the United States so she could get a job there and then send money back to her family in Peru. She had promised Juan that she would contact him when she arrived in America, but after she left, Juan said he never heard from her. This report felt like a promising lead to Ravens. Juan and his wife checked a lot of boxes, especially because, Raven's Jane Doe had features that indicated she could be from a South American country like Peru. And so Ravens wondered if Juan's wife had tried to get into America by using a human smuggler, which is someone who transports immigrants across borders illegally. Human smuggling was obviously an unregulated industry, and Ravens knew smugglers could be very violent or reckless, and the people they were transporting often had no protection.
I need to tell you guys this ghost story. This story was sent into my email, and if you have any ghost stories, paranormal encounters, or scary stories that you'd like to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. I need you to listen to this carefully, because my mom still can't prove that this didn't happen, and the worst part is, she might be the only person who remembers it. This all happened when my mom was younger, back when she was still in high school. One night, her and a group of her friends decided to all hang out at one of their houses. Just a normal night, nothing weird about it. But there was one friend who almost didn't come. We'll call her Sophia. Sophia hadn't been feeling well all day. She told everyone she was tired, a little off, not up for it. But my mom and her friends kept pushing. Come on, it'll be fun. Don't be boring, just stay the night. And eventually, Sophia gave in, which is the part my mom says she thinks about the most now. Because if they hadn't convinced her to come, none of this would have happened. So they're all at the house, just hanging out, talking, doing normal teenage things. Hours go by. And at some point, really late into the night, someone has an idea. They should use a Ouija board. And of course, everyone's into it. It's one of those moments where you're tired, it's dark, it's quiet, and everything feels a little more exciting than it should. By the time they actually start playing, it's almost 3 a.m., which, if you know anything about that kind of stuff, is already unsettling. So they sit in a circle, lights low, hands on the planchette, and they start asking questions. At first it's normal, stupid questions, joke questions. Is anyone here with us? What's your name? How old are you? And it starts moving, answering them, slowly and deliberately, but clearly answering. And everyone's just kind of laughing, a little nervous, but still treating it like it's a game, until Sophia asks something and it doesn't move at all. So she asks again, and nothing. But then someone else asks a question and it responds immediately. Like normal, Sophia tries again, and still nothing. That's when her mood completely shifts. My mom said you could actually feel it. Sophia got really quiet, really uncomfortable. Something just wasn't right. And she looked at everyone and said, I don't like this, we should stop. No one took her seriously. They thought she was just getting scared, so they kept going. Finally, someone asks one last question. Is anyone here in danger? It moves. Slowly. Yes. And now the room is quiet. No one's laughing anymore. So they ask, who? And the planchette starts moving again, letter by letter, S, O, and before it can even finish, Sophia yanks her hand back and shoves the board away hard. We're done. She doesn't wait for anyone to respond. She just keeps repeating it. Stop. Stop. We're not doing this anymore. And that was it. Mood was ruined. No one touched the board again. They all kind of brushed it off and tried to laugh, and eventually just went to sleep. And by morning, it all felt silly, like one of those things that seemed scary in the moment, but not in the daylight. They all went home, and life just continued, until about a week later. My mom gets a call from one of her friends, and her voice is off. Like she's trying to say something that she doesn't want to say, and she tells my mom to look at the newspaper. There had been a car accident, and Sophia was in it, and she didn't survive. My mom said everything after that felt like a blur. All of them talked about it, cried about it. They even talked about that night, the Ouija board, the question, the way it started to spell her name. They all remembered it, every detail. They reached out to her family, tried to ask about funeral arrangements, but they never got a response. And they just assumed her family was grieving, that they didn't want to talk, which made sense. So time passed. A few months later, my mom left for boarding school. She lost touch with that friend group for a while. Didn't really talk to anyone from back home. Until summer. About 5 months after everything had happened, she came back, reconnected with her friends, and they all decided to hang out again like nothing had changed. And for a while, everything feels normal, until my mom gets a phone call from Sophia, she answered. And on the other end, Sophia is just talking. Normally. Like nothing ever happened. Like she hadn't died. Saying things like, "I heard you're back. We should hang out." And my mom is just frozen, trying to process what she's hearing, and finally she says, "Sophia, you died." And there's a pause, and Sophia asks, "What are you talking about?" Now she's freaked out, confused, uncomfortable, and before my mom can even explain, she hangs up. So my mom immediately tells her friends, panicking, trying to make sense of it, and this is the part that still messes with her the most. None of them knew what she was talking about at all. They didn't remember Sophia dying. They didn't remember the newspaper. They didn't remember the phone calls. They didn't even remember that night with the Ouija board. To them, it had never happened. They genuinely thought my mom was losing it, and my mom was so shaken she went home and tried to prove it. She searched for the newspaper article, the one that they had all seen, the one that they had all talked about, and it wasn't there. No record of the accident, no mention of Sophia, nothing. Like it had never existed. And to this day, Sophia is alive. My mom still has her on social media. They've spoken since. She's completely fine. And every single person from that night still says the same thing. They don't remember any of it. Not the board, not the question, not the name, nothing except my mom. She remembers everything, and she still can't explain why she's the only one who does.
Have you ever heard of the buckskin girl? On April 24th of 1981, 3 men were walking along a ditch in Troy, Ohio. That is where they found a very distinct jacket. It was a pretty distinct jacket, and they wanted to take a closer look at it. One of the men went closer to the jacket when he realized that there was a person inside. The woman inside the coat was laying in the fetal position on her right side. She didn't have any shoes on, nor did she have any socks. The 3 men immediately reported this to the police. An autopsy was done the afternoon that she was found. In it, they found that she had suffered extensive blunt force trauma, and she had also been choked. They did also decide that she had only been gone for about 48 hours. They said that she was between 5'4" and 5'6" and between 18 and 26 years old. She also weighed between 125 to 130 pounds. Her skin also had a complexion that made them believe that she was someone who spent a lot of time outside. But overall, she was in good condition, meaning she had been fed well, she had all of her, medically she was okay. It seemed like she came from a place where she was taken care of. There was no identification on her body at all, but she was wearing blue bell-bottom Wrangler jeans, a brown turtleneck, pullover sweater with orange crisscross designs on the front, and a bra and a hoodless, deerless poncho with purple lining. This is pretty distinct, and they did also say that there was a purple lining on the inside, but no one really knew where it came from, but they did think it was homemade. Since she was found so quickly, they were able to pull her fingerprints and also her dental records, and they put this into all of the systems that they had, but nothing came back. They were not able to find an identity through that. Early on, police officers thought that she might be a runaway or that she might be a S worker, but there was no sign of any SA or anything on her body, and so they quickly ruled that out. They also thought that maybe she was the victim of a serial killer that had been in the area, but that person was mostly targeting S workers, and so they really didn't think that there was a connection here. Despite trying to find her family or finding who she is and finding whoever did this to her, they were unable to find anything, and the case very quickly went cold for 37 years. And with no other evidence, they were unable to find anything. They would frequently go back to the maybe she was an S worker and that she had been targeted by that, but there was no evidence to support it. They even did isotope testing, which I believe is where they're trying to test where you're from, and they figured that maybe she was from like the northeastern part of the country, but again, nothing would check out. They were able to find a vehicle exhaust on her clothes, and so they figured that maybe she was a hitchhiker, or that she would that was her main form of travel, was hitchhiking. But again, there was just nothing. But finally, on April 9th of 2018, working with the DNA Doe project and using her DNA, they were able to find out who she was. Her name was Marcia King, and she went missing in 1980 from Little Rock, Arkansas. Her family said that they hadn't seen her since 1980, but they had been looking for her this entire time. They also said that she was someone who would often go hitchhike and just kind of disappear. Marcia had already been buried in Ohio, and so her family just chose to leave her there. But they did have a memorial there with the police officers who had worked on her case. But overall, this is just a really tragic case, and no one even knows what happened or who did this to her. Personally, I feel like her family deserves justice, and if anyone knows something, you should always say something. But what are your thoughts on this? Let me know down in the comments, and follow for more true crime.
We listen, we don't get scared, and we don't judge. Let me give you guys a story time of when my cousin dated this guy, and when they broke up, things went downhill for her because she was dating somebody who practiced witchcraft. So y'all, for story's sake, we are going to call this guy Pepsi, and we're going to call my cousin Barry. Now, Barry was like an older cousin of mine, y'all, and her and Pepsi had been dating from high school through and through, so they had been together for a couple of years. And after high school, Barry was fortunate to go to school, and then she went to school, she graduated, and then she got a job, and she was working a nice job, she had a car, all those good things. And Pepsi as well also worked hard and had a job, and they did not live together, they lived in separate places, but their relationship was a beautiful relationship because it did nothing but just bloom and bloom and bloom. Now things take a turn for the worse because now Pepsi meets a girl at work, likes her, and also starts to date her. This girl made a lot of money. She was in a better position at work, so their relationship made sense. Because this girl would pay Pepsi's installment, car installment, he would pay Pepsi's rent. So Pepsi was just living the life as a queen, being treated like the king that he is. So Pepsi eventually ends things with Barry, and was like, listen, I don't want to waste your time. I've met somebody else. Me and you have been together for so long. I think it's better for us to explore things. No problem. Now, when their relationship ends, Barry was supposed to get a promotion at her job. Unfortunately, she doesn't know what happened with the promotion, and she did not get the promotion. Somebody else got the promotion. And then eventually the company tells the people that they're about to get retrenched, but then nobody gets retrenched. Only Barry lost her job. Only Barry got retrenched. So now, naturally, she can't pay for her car. She can't pay for her apartment no more. She has to move back home. And things start going. She starts losing weight because obviously she's depressed. She doesn't have a job. She lost her long-time relationship that she thought was going to end in marriage. She doesn't have a car anymore. She's just struggling. And obviously people in the township are laughing at her, and some of them are doing it in her face. So one time Barry decides that she wants to try and commit the unaliving. She doesn't want to be on this world. She doesn't want to be in this world anymore because Pepsi is living his life with his other girlfriend. Their relationship is flourishing. They had been together for a year. Everything is just good, and she is suffering. She attempts, obviously, and she fails. They take her to the hospital. When they get to the hospital, her mom now obviously is telling my grandmother everything that's happening, and my grandmother is like, listen, when she comes out of the hospital, let's go and check the traditional way and see like what's going on. For sure, when she leaves the hospital, they talk to her, they advise her. Obviously, at the hospital, they gave her a counselor because she needs one, clearly. And when she gets to my grandmother's village, they take her to a traditional healer. And when they get to the traditional healer, obviously they do their things, and the traditional healer tells them that no, the person that has had you tied is the mother-in-law. Your boyfriend, your ex's mother-in-law, Pepsi's mother now, does not want you to flourish. Now, what had happened was initially the mother-in-law went to the traditional healer because she wanted you not to hurt her son, because she seen how her son loves you so much. And then Pepsi added on, was like, listen, if she's not with me, she should not flourish whatsoever. She should not make it in life. She must suffer until I come back in her life. So basically, Pepsi did not want Barry to beat him in life. Like, if she's not with him, she doesn't want her to be out here living her life and looking pretty, because he's obviously going to miss her, and he's going to feel bad that he's moved on with somebody else, and Barry is there like living her life. Like, basically just didn't want her to be there at the top without him being there as well. So the traditional healer tells Barry that these people they have your jersey, and that jersey is what they're using to continue whatever spell that they're doing. And what's crazy is they have to actually go and renew the spell. And it's funny because they actually keep on actively going back to renew the spell on you. Mind you, you're not with their son anymore. So the traditional healer is like, that jersey that they have, you either need to go get it, or I will mix my things here and make a plan for it to go away. And obviously, Barry's like, I'm never going to speak to those people ever again. Please, dollar what you must. The traditional healer guy's dollars. A couple of days later, we hear that Pepsi's mother's house burnt to ashes. Every single thing that was in that house burned to ashes. Now, of course, the jersey was there, so obviously the jersey got burnt as well. And I'm just like, that is crazy. And y'all, literally after all of that happened, Barry decided to dedicate herself to church. She went back to church, guys. She started praying more. She started reading more. She would also invite me to church sometimes. And when I tell you, within a few months, Barry got an opportunity to work overseas, and as we speak, guys, Barry's working overseas now. She met a man overseas. She got married, she's got kids. Barry's older than me, she's way older than me, but life worked out. Don't take spiritual things lightly, guys. Pray. If you do what you must, because you would think that somebody breaks up with you, they don't love you, and then you find out that they are doing things behind your back. Mind you, this is your ex. This is not somebody that you were still dating or whatever. Be careful. Men practice witchcraft too. It's just that it's not a common thing, but they do it as well.